I'm Nan McKay with Kent Watkins, founder and chair of the American Academy of Housing and Communities. We would like to welcome you to the Community Trailblazers Academy series.
The Academy nominates people in the U.S. and throughout the world who have significantly contributed to the betterment of cities. I think you will enjoy these stories from people who are really there in person.
To stay up to date with our latest videos, subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button above the video. This is Nan McKay, and I would like to introduce you to Alison Gross. As founder and president of Daintree Advisory LLC, Alison provides expertise to leaders of major companies to help them create business opportunities through events and through brand positioning. She guides strategic planning and development of thought leadership for revenue growth to assist her clients' visibility and reputation by producing and participating in premier business events. She's produced global events such as the Maccabi Games and a World Ocean Sailing Race. She's supervised 6,000 volunteers on an event, and we are talking worldwide. And she started her company, Daintree Advisory, during the pandemic. So welcome, Alison Gross.
Thank you, Nan. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to chatting to you.
Well, it sounds like you have had an exciting life, traveling the world and producing premier events for investors. So let's kind of explore how you arrived at this spot in your career. You were brought up in North Manchester in an English suburb, I believe, and found a passion in textile design, and you went into the fashion industry and became a knitwear specialist. How did you get to the United States? And then I know you work for Macy's. How did you transition to Macy's?
Yeah, I always wanted to live in New York. I was fascinated, and I had that idealistic feel for New York from watching films, obviously, movies. I was working for a British fashion importer. And looking back on it, it was a very easy transition. I was going to factories in Asia because I was buying knitwear, and the factories were supplying American clients as much as UK clients and European clients. So it was a very easy transition to be able to say, okay, look for a job in America because I'm basically going to the same places to source the materials. So the first job that I got before I came to New York, I am a little conservative, so I had the job first before I jumped on a plane. I worked in the coat industry, and I was hired by a company who wanted to break into sportswear. So they hired me to open up with department stores in America. And that was the first thing that I did. We opened many different department stores. I worked for another importer. And then I switched to the other side of the desk. So instead of being the importer and the person that was selling, I then became the buyer for Macy's, and I bought Clubhouse knitwear for the whole of the United States. I was still traveling because Macy's did its own sourcing, and I was still in Asia 6 months of a year, but I was the buyer as opposed to the seller, and it got me here. It was wonderful.
Well, I have to tell you, Macy's is my favorite department store.
Yes, mine too.
Were they great to work with?
Yes, they were. And of course, there's lots of transitions and lots of consolidations over the years in the retail industry. But it was a family. I mean, we traveled together and we shared information and we would go on buying trips. And it was, there was really great camaraderie.
Now, let's see. You were working at Macy's, and then now you went over to producing custom private events. Tell us some of the events that led up to this.
Yeah, I was working for Macy's when I was expecting my first child, and that was the push that made me think about changing careers. Being away for 6 months of a year was, in my opinion, not an ideal way to bring up a kid. So I started volunteering. And when my son was born, I was volunteering at a local community center. They asked me, what can you do for us? And I gave them my background, and they said, oh, we've got fundraising events. And the first event that they were doing was a fashion show. Perfect transition. And I went from there to doing all of their fundraising events. They offered me a seat on their board. I then ran a national conference for board members of community centers, so teaching people how to help community centers at the national level. So it was a good transition. It got me into events. You mentioned the Maccabi Games. I then became the director of the Maccabi Games, which is 18 months of my life for a 5-day event, which gives you a sense of how big these things are. And that gave me the opportunity to move into financial services. So that was the trajectory to get me to virtually where I am today.
What are the Maccabi Games?
The Maccabi Games takes place every 4 years in Israel. And on the 3 intermediate years, it's a youth games that takes place in the United States. So we had 2,500 athletes, 18 different sporting events, as I think you had mentioned, 6,000 volunteers, putting together the games. The year that I ran it, it was in the state of New Jersey. So we were coordinating all the different delegations, how the athletes competed. There's an opening ceremony, which took place at the Meadowlands Arena, for which I actually did the seating plan, which was insane, as you can imagine. I mean, I think there were 24,000 seats, and I figured it out in blocks as to who needed to sit where. And an opening ceremony similar like a mini Olympics. So it was an amazing experience into global events.
Well, we would love to hear about some of those past events that you managed. So tell us a little more about some of these events. Think about what was the hardest one you did, what was the biggest one, what were your crises, that kind of stuff.
Oh, yes, there are always crises. I think thinking about what was the most challenging and what had the most components was when I worked for ABN AMRO, we sponsored a round the world ocean sailing race. And I was responsible for the North America legs of the race, which was New York, Annapolis, and Baltimore. So the sort of things that I got involved with that you just wouldn't even think about. The race came up the Hudson River into a marina called the North Cove Marina, but it wasn't deep enough for the keels of the yachts. So we had to get the Army Corps of Engineers to come and dredge the Hudson River. And I look back on it and I'm going, I can't believe we did that. And then we had thousands of spectators who needed to be able to see the race from the water. So renting boats and getting them all out into the New York Harbor to be able to see the event. And then the festivities culminated with all of the sailors from all of the different yachts were given the keys of the city by the city of New York. So we put on this spectacular evening event. We invited, I think, about a couple of thousand people. Held this downtown Manhattan, and to be as inclusionary as possible, because it was a sporting event, we invited many either current or past sports legends from New York. So I mean, a wonderful example that will always stay with me was we had the 1975 Knicks members of the team. So Walt Frazier, Bill Bradley, Earl Monroe came to speak and to be part of this celebration. So that was probably the most complicated event that I ever did. The largest thing that I work on by far is the World Economic Forum at Davos. I've been going to Davos for 7 years now, leading a delegation. And what's involved in leading a delegation is everything from securing their security badges, their accommodations, where they're going to meet, putting together meeting lounges, but more importantly, developing a strategy for right down to the basics of why do they need to be there? Who do they need to meet with? What are they going to talk about? How does that lay into their business? And then I would be negotiating with the World Economic Forum to get them speaking slots and to get them as part of the program. And that's really, there are a number of people like me who do that in the world, but it's certainly the biggest thing that, that I have an expertise on. And then you mentioned crises. I mean, yes, there are always, but we always prevail. I mean, we always figure out a way to get round things. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, we were in Davos, and the week before Davos, I'm not kidding, there was 9 feet of snow. So, I mean, you can imagine we arrive in town, and even with Swiss ingenuity, I mean, 9 feet, there was nowhere to put it. There was nowhere to move it. You couldn't get the transportation around. I mean, it was a challenge, but, you know, we managed. And one of the other ones that was a challenge that that really sticks in my memory, I've done a lot of work in the insurance and reinsurance industry. And the largest global reinsurance conference in the world is something called Rendez-Vous Septembre. And that takes place every year in Monte Carlo. Well, about 4 years ago, the largest hotel in Monte Carlo closed for not just a refurbishment, but they pulled half of the hotel down. And it was closed for 3 years. They rebuilt it from the ground up. So we lost accommodations, we lost the meeting space. I had a meeting space that I'd had for 15 years. That wing of the hotel was gone. So we're looking at each other going, okay, what do we do now? And I came up with the idea, my solution was to buy out a restaurant for the week. And we converted the restaurant, we rebranded it, we put up all the signage, we made a hub that was our company's home for the week that we were at this reinsurance conference. Well, fast forward 3 years later, when the hotel opened, we didn't go back to the meeting room in the hotel because the restaurant concept had been so successful, and we'd carved out our own look and feel on our own space, that actually the solution to the crisis put us in a better place.
Now, from what I remember of Monte Carlo, it isn't a real big place, if I remember right. Where did you find places for people to stay?
Yeah, it's not a big place. And what often happens with these conferences is their own global growth actually becomes a problem and hurts them. So what started as a relatively small European conference then grew because the American part of reinsurance joined it. Then all of Asia and all of China joined it. It is now too big for the town. You absolutely hit the nail on the head. So what's happened is we've moved into as many properties as we can find. In some cases, we rent private homes and apartments, and some of our competitors and other colleagues we know have had to stay as far away as Nice and drive in every day. I mean, fortunately, I've not ever needed to do that. I'm known for my contacts and my strength, and the whole reason people hire me in the first place is because I can get this stuff done, and I know people in town. But it is a huge problem, and not just for that conference, but it happens in other places as well, that conferences outgrow their location. And yeah, you need the likes of me to be able to figure out how to find the workarounds.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, to tell you the truth. I mean, challenging, a lot of work, but it sounds like fun too.
Oh, it's definitely fun, and it's fascinating. And I mean, somewhere like Monaco, where the hotels and where this restaurant is that I was talking about is actually on the track of the Monte Carlo Grand Prix. So you're seeing the tire tracks on the road and the screech marks and the stuff that's left from when they were doing the road race, and then you're building out onto the road rather in the way that we're seeing during COVID now, where you see restaurants are building outdoor space in the traffic lanes. We would build out into a lane of traffic, but we'd have to do it in a way that could be put up easily and then taken down again because the road was needed for the Grand Prix. So all these kind of logistical challenges were, were just, part of the fun.
And that's where you have to get your wizard hat on, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
Well, now that the world has gone digital, people aren't traveling as much. How has that changed your business?
Yes, we have gone digital. And what I've learned and what my clients are learning over this, now it's almost a year, is that we found this as an opportunity. We can now reach more people in multiple time zones at the same time. I'm not thinking in terms of getting on a plane and bringing people to a central spot. We're able to reach people in a much more global way, which for someone like me and my global clients is absolutely wonderful. But it has highlighted the need for different skills amongst the clients. So the skills that are needed, and clients do need guidance. I mean, best practices for how do you network? How do you reach out to people when you're doing everything virtually like this? How do you use a chat bar? And there are different levels of, people's skills and comfort levels. So we're helping people through that. There are different cultural norms that we're helping people through. It is a sort of tricky transition, but I think as we look at it now, it's not going to go away. I think we will certainly evolve into a hybrid function of interacting in person at events, but there's always going to be digital. We're always going to grow and learn how to do it. And ultimately, I think it has created this global advantage. I am enjoying it.
When people talk about the new normal, I think that's absolutely right. There is going to be a new normal, and it's going to be very close to what we have now, maybe a little bit integrated into what was in the past. But if people expect us to go backwards, I don't think it's going to happen.
No, it's not. It's not. And it's a shame because I'm still hearing from people who say, when do we get back to normal? And in many cases, I will push back and say, there is no back. It's going to be different. We need to embrace it. And yes, we've lost some things, and it's so important to keep that personal relationship and that interaction and the warmth and to come across as who we are, but there is no going back. We just need to accept that.
Something I'm really interested in is you talk about thought leadership, and I'm wondering, how do you integrate thought leadership into your business?
Yeah, it's really the core of what we do. It's the foundation. My value and the value of my business is our expertise, particularly in the UN's Strategic Development Goals. So I am helping my clients articulate their message in a very real way that's at the core of their business. I mean, we've heard quite a bit about the phrase greenwashing, meaning that people are just putting up, a commercial or some sort of communication that says, yes, they're going green, or yes, they're embracing a particular strategic development goal, but without really thinking about, is it a part of their business? Does it go back into their whole value chain of how, if they're producing, what are they producing? If they are creating services, how are they reaching their clients? And what I do is put forward my take on their writing or collaborate with them on the things that they're doing to make sure that the thought leadership is a foundation to build upon rather than something that you sort of tickle on the top and add afterwards, which is always going to come through as false and is never going to work, let's face it.
You have written 2 blogs or articles on your website, and I will certainly link to these. But I was fascinated with 2 of them. One is, how do you think that COVID has affected the future of our cities?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you picked up on this particular one of all the things that I've been working on. This has become a passion of mine. And everything that we've seen from the very beginning of people going out on their balconies and leaning out of their windows to talk to each other or to sing or to bang on pots and pans, we've seen this relationship building within cities that has changed. So where cities have adapted and will need to adapt going forward in so many ways, and people working from home, so needing to use their space differently, that's going to impact the sorts of home building, or I think more importantly, the change of use of current buildings as to how people live and utilize their space. The way that cities are using their open spaces. I mentioned the streets before when we were talking about restaurants. The Open Streets program that New York has had, the park spaces, being able to pivot from traffic lanes into more bike lanes, more walkability, more space for families. There have been things that other cities have done where they've opened more playgrounds on space that had been waste ground, just turning it quickly into children's playgrounds and things so that people can get outside. In terms of infrastructure, transportation usage has completely changed. I mean, we think, again, I'm based in New York. You think of the satellite suburbs and the outer boroughs of New York, where the transportation systems were based on a 9 to 5 commute or an 8 to 6 commute, with the hub and the thrust of transportation coming in and out at key rush hours. That kind of use is different now. Now we're looking more at a hub and spoke system of what's been termed Zoom cities, of where people are staying within 15 minutes of where they live to buy their groceries, do the things that they need, go to see their doctors, go and live in a way where transportation is going to be needed in this as I say, hub and spoke method of not necessarily needing high traffic patterns into the city for early morning and late at night. And cities are going to need to make these changes. Cities are also going to need to look at rezoning and reuse of commercially zoned buildings, as I alluded to. And this is, it's a challenge, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to need public-private partnerships. It's going to need federal stimulus because cities are struggling, but it's going to need a pass-on effect of, if there's going to be federal stimulus, there's going to need tax breaks to commercial owners who are going to make these kind of changes of use of their buildings. And again, those commercial owners are going to need to pass on rent breaks to residential and commercial tenants. So it's really everybody working together. The only way that cities are going to be able to move forward economically and make these massive shifts is by public-private partnerships to make these things happen. And it's a challenge, and it's a fascinating one. I'm the eternal optimist. I do believe it's going to happen. As I say, I'm writing a great deal about it. I have another piece coming out shortly. But it's one that I think we should be watching as something for the future of cities, something that is coming.
Well, I also really loved your article on 5 reasons for optimism for 2021. Can you, and I'm going to elaborate on this because it was really interesting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I, again, really thinking about why I'm a glass half full person, why I think, particularly city dwellers, we are optimistic. We do believe in making a better future. And some of that's short term and some of it is long term. And I picked out 5 things. And what I started with thinking about which of the 5 things are going to make the most economic impact. And the first thing that I thought about, and I've been reading a great deal about this, and the World Economic Forum, the UN has been talking about this, is a COVID passport. And when we use the word passport, it's not just opening up safety for travel and tourism. If you think about how are we going to get back into sports arenas? How are we going to get back into concert halls? There is going to be needed, whether it's a physical passport or whether it's an app on a phone or however this thing works, there is going to need a safety piece that is recognized nationally and internationally and globally, that public and private and institutions can use to keep the world safe so that we can open up again. So that was definitely my number 1 choice. The second thing I chose is protecting the environment. And again, this goes back into economic impact. Our leaders can choose now either to take or not the environment into their planning when they're investing for the future of jobs. And I think what COVID has done is it's created a pivot point where we can do something and seize this opportunity by directing stimulus monies towards job creation in new areas that will reduce carbon emissions, areas that will be good for the environment. Again, going back to it's not back to where we thought we were before, it's the new normal. So that was my second point. My points 3 and 4 are really linked together, and point 3 was community, a sense of community, and point 4 was home ownership. And again, we've seen this wonderful sense of community, of coming together, the 15-minute cities that many cities, particularly highlighted by the mayor of Paris, this hyper-local planning for development in cities. And also, when we're looking at a sense of community, how the local news media is now being supported in ways that it hasn't been supported in the last few years. And this community spirit that I think is so important for going forward. And I couple that with the opportunity for first-time home ownership. I think there's a real potential here. The mortgage rate is lower than we've seen in many years, with a mortgage rate of under 3%. That is really, all indications are that it's going to be sustained at that low rate for quite a while to come. That I think that this is a time for the prospect of home ownership that is sustainable. So I put those 2 things together. My 5th reason for optimism is more of a long-term play. And what I focused in on here is this fact that COVID has revealed this dreadful systemic health inequality amongst minority groups and also amongst the lower income groups in the United States. But now we've identified this, there's a great opportunity to fix it. And by that, I'm talking again about public-private, an opportunity here. There needs to be health education. There needs to be better nutrition through support of local community groups, investment in food stores and locally sourced healthier food. There needs to be investment in school nutrition programs. And there also needs to be thought about living healthier. exercising and walking, a way to really change lives for the next generation, not just by providing healthcare and dealing with the problems that the communities have got now, but by shifting that and saying, okay, there's healthcare services that are needed now, but by changing long-term the way that people live. And I think that's the biggest impact for optimism for the future, for the next generation. So those were my 5 things. I'd love to hear what other people's are, but those were mine.
What do you think about climate change? Is that part of what you're talking about when you talk about people needing to think about changing some of their habits about getting out and enjoying the outside a little bit more? Does climate change play into that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a piece of all of this. It's a part of protecting the environment. It's a part of looking at the built environment, looking at rising waters and seeing the impact on coastal communities and coastal cities, to say, okay, this isn't something that we can just build bigger dikes. This is really looking at the impact of climate change on everything that we do. And there are some really exciting things that are happening. I'm thrilled to see that the current administration is putting the US back into the Paris Climate Accord. I'm thrilled to see what GM is talking about doing with electric vehicles and phasing out the gas vehicles over the next 15 to 20 years. There's so many pieces of what business communities are doing, but I think it's very much up to the way that we live, the way that we travel, the way that we eat, the way that we work, so that individuals have a personal responsibility to make an impact, to work towards making a difference on climate change as well.
Well, it has certainly been interesting talking with you. You talk about thought leadership. You're a great thinker yourself and writer as well. So we look forward to seeing what other blogs you're going to come up with on your site, and give us a little more of your thought and advice in these additional areas that we don't even know what they are yet.
I'm really looking forward to sharing more with you, with my clients. There's so much more we can do, and yes, I'm thrilled to be able to share and to make a difference. That's what it's all about, right?
That's what it's all about. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please join Kent and me, and please subscribe free to this channel. Share it with your friends and click on the thumbs up icon to like us.